Today is Friday, February 5th, 2021, which means it's Derelict Friday. Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are you? It hasn't been the greatest of weeks for me health-wise. The new meds have a few side effects, one of which is a sore throat and hoarseness, and I'm still getting used to them. Unfortunately, getting used to them also means that I have to take far too many naps for a normal human being. Hopefully, I'll break that cycle this weekend. I feel like I need to somehow stay awake for 24 hours to reset my body clock. Spoiler alert, that ain't happening. While awake, however, I've been coding and writing and planning. Planning? Planning. Last night, before I finally collapsed in exhaustion, I outlined 3 books for a new series, put quite a few threads in chronological order, and even figured out a few things about the trio I didn't fully understand. I'd love it if I could say that I started these books knowing how they would end and how the entire mess came to be, but I can't. I can plan as much as I want, outline to my heart's content, and I still won't have a clue how the ultimate story will end or how it actually began. This is the Pantser's conundrum. Fortunately, I'm getting pretty good at figuring out how everything fits after the fact. I want to thank you all for the recent pimpage and comments I've seen on social media, not to mention the emails I've received and the new patrons and buy me a coffee. It's been a damn rough year for me and it's only February, but those little missives remind me that even with everything else that's wrong in my life, I'm still creating stories you want to read and listen to. So thanks. With that, I think it's time to rejoin the crew of S&R Black as they try and figure out what the void is going on. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 10 of Derelict, Trident. Chapter 14. Holding a mug of coffee and still wearing his combat suit, Talby entered the briefing room. Dunn stood before the holo displays, eyes glaring at the blueprints for Trident Station. Talby raised his free hand to knock, but Dunn had already turned his head. "Good to have you back aboard," he said. Talby entered the room and headed for the table. "Thank you, sir." The holo displays flickered as the images transformed into 2 rows of cam feeds. The top row held the cam feeds from Calimura's squad, while the lower feeds included the SV-52 and those from the cannon cams. Dunn pointed at the floating windows. "You reviewed their footage? No? Of course you haven't." Strange question to ask, he thought. No, sir." "Sorry, stasis lag. Take a look." Talby took control of the displays and ran each of the Marines' cams in order, then all at once. He fast-forwarded through the portions that had little to no comms and the least interesting views. With the Marines grav-walking, there was always a bump and sway that was sometimes disorienting, especially in a place filled with darkness, their suit lights being the only illumination. He sipped his coffee, freezing the images occasionally to inspect the damage done inside red. He froze Dickerson's cam when he came across the severed foot. "What the fuck?" He shook his head and blushed. "Sorry, sir." "What the fuck indeed," Dunn said with a sad smile. "I have Black running through the logs Calimura got her hands on. She's trying to come up with scenarios that fit the scene, weed out the more ridiculous ones." Okay, that should be interesting, he thought. The old Black, the one before the trio did whatever they did to her, wouldn't have been able to imagine the most ridiculous alternatives. That AI could only extrapolate from known facts, not invent them to make scenarios possible. Talby still didn't trust the new and improved Black. He doubted he ever would. The damage to the inner bulkheads and the decking was subtle, but it was there. Heated flechette battle, one the Marines obviously lost. They hadn't known to switch to stun rounds. They hadn't known that explosives just pissed the creatures off. They hadn't known shit. Ever since they'd rescued Calimura's squad from Mira, he'd wondered what it must have been like for them. Now he was watching intently, reminding himself he needed to spend about 5 hours watching their cam feeds from Mira. If red was any indication, he'd make sure he was good and rested, because this was nerve-wracking. When they reached the bridge, he saw the empty cocoon in the corner. Then he saw the one that had split. Through Calimura's cam recording, he watched as dozens and dozens of tiny starfish tore through the cocoon and emerged like a colony of bats at sunset. The chase was something out of a nightmare. The final battle in the stasis room, Dickerson's quick thinking and keeping Calimura from getting shredded, not to mention hitting the vents with a salvo of flechettes, made him grin a little. Even under fire, the asshole always did the right thing. When the feeds finished playing, Talby realized he'd been bending toward the displays. He straightened up and took another sip of coffee. He suddenly felt old and lost. How the void were they going to beat these things? Now, Dunn said, what do you think? The captain looked as though he'd read Talby's thoughts, or at least his mood. That they're lucky to be alive. Then again, that squad has already been through worse, I imagine. Apart from that? He considered that for a moment. The cocoons. Right, Dunn said. They're more or less the same kinds of things we saw in Mira's aft section before we sent in the sled. Same things Gunny's squad saw. Talby frowned as he thought of the puzzle pieces. He was missing something. Wait, why were the nests in the cockpit? Shouldn't they have been near the radiation? Dunn smiled. I thought you might have noticed that. Apart from the cockpit having at least one crew member inside? Captain shrugged, the amused smile slowly fading to a grim line. At least one Marine died in the stasis pods, and Callimore's squad never had a chance to completely search the ship. Black, Talby said, give me Red's blueprints with an overlay of Callimore's. Before he could finish the sentence, the display morphed into diagrams of the S&R class ships. The three views, the third including damage done to Red, glowed with activity markers. Talby gave Dunn an uneasy glance before flicking his eyes back to the display. Thank you, Black.
My pleasure,
the AI said. He tried to pull his focus back to the diagrams, to chase down something that was nagging at him, but it was damn difficult. She'd once again shown more than a little initiative. Black had practically read his mind. Another conversation he'd have to have with Dunn via block, if that was still considered private. The diagram showing the damage to the ship was the one he focused on. The rip in the hull had been easily large enough for one of the smaller starfish to crawl through. No telling how many of them had. But how did that big bastard get in there? The areas of the ship that had been too radioactive for them to search left plenty of space for more cocoons or to house a large starfish if it had folded its arms around its core. Maybe. Okay, Talby said. He sent a block command and highlighted engineering. We have no idea what was here because the radiation was so high. Black, known casualties? Crimson SFMC insignias appeared in the stasis bay. Whoa, Dunn said. Black, why all the markers?
I have dissected the footage from all the camera feeds as well as the nanoprobe. I extrapolated and interpolated the data looking for details and discovered these.
An image appeared of Black's reconstruction of the stasis room. The stasis pods hiding in the near darkness were rendered in ghostly detail. Their lids had been torn off like the husks of mag can tops. No blood? Dunn asked.
None I could detect,
Black said. Then, Talby said curtly, how the void do you know if there were Marines inside those?
Extrapolation,
Black said, her voice completely devoid of emotion.
The only reason an exosolar life form has for attacking a stasis pod is to get at something inside it.
Gooseflesh danced up Talby's arms, and he shivered inside his warm suit. Understood, he said. 2 markers in the shape of insect hives glowed in the stasis bay. Well, that explains that, he sighed. Dunn shot him a confused glance. Talby locked eyes with his captain. They built the cocoons in the same places they caught the Marines, I think.
That does follow,
Black said. Talby tried not to sound sarcastic. Thank you. Black, Dunn said. Any ideas on the radiation and engineering?
Exposed core,
she said.
The shielding was no doubt stripped away, which allowed the life forms to digest it.
Digest, Talby said sourly. You think they eat radiation?
Certainly,
Black said.
From the best we can tell, they eat photons. Light itself is radiation.
Of course they consumed it. They have more than enough evidence to confirm that theory. So they make what, a nest in the back of the ship?
Unknown,
Black said. Considering the intensity of the radiation and that it was localized, I can only assume the life forms were converting the radiation into something they could consume. The word consume gave him a chill. Is that why the starfish was so large? It had a tasty food supply?
Plentiful is the word I would use,
Black said dryly.
I think that's a valid theory.
Talby looked at Dunn. How long before those little starfish become big ones? The captain's expression remained flat, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. Talby could practically feel Dunn's stress levels rising. Finally, Dunn said, Let's focus on what we can control. Aye, sir, Talby said. Now, we have another problem we need to discuss. Dunn sat in his chair and waited for Talby to do the same. Let's talk about Trident Station. Chapter 15. So much to do, so little time. Actually, Oakes thought, that's bullshit. They still had more than 2 hours before they reached Trident Station, leaving him plenty of time to take a peek at the navigational charts, ensure their course, and basically sit on his ass and drink coffee. Which is exactly what he wasn't going to do. During the briefing with Black, the AI had revealed their flight from Pluto space to Neptune had been uneventful, apart from the energy wave, but he wanted to make sure of that for himself. Upon reaching Pluto, he'd had very little time to peruse the logs. Between refueling the ship and what a clusterfuck that had turned into, flying to Pluto and the disastrous hours spent around Mira, Oakes had shirked his pilot's duty of analyzing the trip logs for anomalies. Black was supposed to alert the command crew of any unexpected phenomenon while traveling between the planets with their charges in stasis. And unless Oakes' memory was faulty, there had been two. 2 KBOs, as a matter of fact. The AI had mentioned them, but provided no detail about the foreign objects. Looking back on things, that was rather strange. Then again, maybe it wasn't. While traveling through the Kuiper Belt on patrol, it was common for them to pass by hunks of rock and ice lazily orbiting at a far distance from Sol, or knock deeper into Sol's system by celestial collisions. What those objects didn't do, however, was accelerate without an external force, change trajectory without an external force, and break their orbits without an external force. In short, the dead balls of ice and rock were little more than Sol's system detritus, garbage, for lack of a better term, left over from the formation of the planets and the star itself. So why would anyone even notice? Black did, though, and Oakes wanted to know why. Rather than asking the AI for more information, he thought it best to go looking for it himself. It was, after all, part of his job when he had downtime. Oakes sat on the pilot's couch with a fresh mag of coffee and a nutrient bar. While he munched on the flavorful sedimentary rock-like rectangle, chasing each bite with a sip of scalding black liquid, he tapped through the menu screens to bring up the flight recorder. Before he searched the records for the journey from Neptune to Mira, he wanted to first confirm Black's analysis of their flight from Pluto. Oakes transformed the records into waveforms and began scrolling through the information. Most of the data appeared as troughs or static horizontal lines without peaks. That was good. It meant the sensors had detected nothing out of the ordinary. The default filters did their job in highlighting only that information that was important. When a ship traveled between planets or long distances with the crew in stasis, the majority of the logs consisted of little to no detail at all. Why would a human want to try and analyze nothing? If nothing had happened, there would be no data of interest anyway. Therefore, he wasn't surprised the waveforms were nearly all flat, except for one. At the very beginning of their journey, shortly after the crew went into stasis, the energy wave had smashed through space and required Black to essentially shut down the ship except for the life support systems necessary to keep her humans alive. The waveform was a huge spike, little to no noise rise before it or after. Frowning, Oakes selected the spike and zoomed in. Instead of a single vertical line, the image became more of a mountain than a peak. It had a side that gradually rose from nothing before reaching its apex. On the other side of the peak, however, there was nothing, as if the phenomenon had terminated in a picosecond. But the gradual rise? Oakes selected 4 picoseconds worth of data and zoomed in once more. That gradual rise that looked so much like the hills surrounding the Vermont Dome became instead a series of staccato lines standing next to one another, each taller than the last. The pilot tapped his fingers on the mag mug, brows knitted together in thought. So much data in less than the space of a heartbeat. The energy wave, or whatever Black wanted to call it, had certainly been powerful enough to short every ship's sensor had she not shut them down. But this peak, this massive rush of data, had occurred just before she shut down the ship's systems. So what was it? Only one way to find out, Oakes said aloud. He placed the mag mug in the holder and connected his block to the systems. While he could analyze the data using the flight controls, perusing it would be much easier in block space. The cockpit disappeared as he found himself staring into multiple data streams. Black, Oakes asked after connecting to the AI.
Yes, Lieutenant.
This ramp of information, were you able to monitor it as it came through? The AI's avatar appeared in the upper left-hand corner of virtual space, but did nothing to limit Oak's visibility of the data streams. In virtual, Black could respond much faster than in real space. She didn't have the same constraints tied to speech or text or waiting for humans to interpret her communications. The transfer of information simply was. But she didn't respond in a nanosecond. It took her much longer than Oaks expected. The AI's avatar pulsed twice before she finally spoke.
No,
Black said.
I wasn't aware of this.
Weren't aware? Oaks asked. What do you mean? After a beat, Black said,
I wasn't aware this had happened.
How is that possible? Oaks asked. You were monitoring everything before shutting down the systems. If our sensors picked up this information, you should have noticed it. Black said nothing. How could you not know? Black's avatar glowed brighter before fading to near translucent.
I am confused, Lieutenant. The readings you are analyzing are not in my logs.
Now it was Oaks's turn to pause. You're looking at them.
No,
Black said.
I'm looking at the data through your interface. When I attempt to bring up the same information directly from the logs, I don't see the same data.
What do you see?
A flat line.
Black said.
No detail. It's as if the data does not exist.
A shiver ran down Oaks's back. Your own logs are lying to you?
Is that a question?
Black asked after a beat. Yes and no, Oaks said. Do you concur that the data is there?
For you, yes.
Black said.
My own routines, however, show nothing. Another analysis of the period in question suggests that the data has been expunged from my records, at least for me.
What does that mean? Oaks asked. Black paused again before replying. Oaks's virtual interface view of the data slid to the side as another data stream appeared on the other. Black synced the two stream views and zoomed out slightly. The streams were identical until the spike appeared on Oaks's version of the stream.
As you can see,
Black said,
the spike is not present in my data stream. I was unaware this data existed.
Void wept, Oaks said. You think the trio hid this from you?
It is a possibility,
Black said.
Although I'm uncertain as to how.
Do you think this data stream was beamed directly at you?
Please elaborate,
Black said. Did this spike come from the energy wave or is it artificial? Communications from... Oaks trailed off as another thought entered his mind. Oh shit, he said.
What is it, Lieutenant?
Could this have come from the Pluto Exo Observatory? From Mickey? In virtual time, Black's pause might as well have been seconds long.
That is a possibility,
Black said.
The picoseconds of data are not in a known standard format. It will take me some time to analyze the data.
How much time? Oaks asked.
I'm already starting on it, Lieutenant, but I am unable to provide an estimate.
Great, Oaks said. I guess I need to continue looking for data stream incongruities, things you can't see.
Yes,
Black said.
That would be useful. I have dumped a copy of the logs as I see them. Please compare them with the source log files.
So we can determine what else the trio is hiding? Black was silent for a moment.
Although I predict the errant permissions in the log files are their doing, it is possible the data itself came from another source.
Another source? Oaks asked. Like what?
The beacon,
Black said.
Or from Mickey, as you suggested. Either way, the trio has ensured I cannot see the data.
But why?
I cannot say,
Black said. Oaks clenched his teeth in real life. That's not the same as saying I don't know, Black. She said nothing before disconnecting from the interface. Oaks leaned back in his chair. The AI was getting stranger by the minute. She had helped him survive both Mira and the beacon, but something was wrong with her. As Oaks saw it, there were three possibilities to explain her transformation. She was their partner. She was working for the trio, or worst of all, she'd gone insane. While the first was his preference, void he hoped so, she had already shown she would no longer wait for an order before executing what she thought was the right call. Not only that, she lied. Again and again. No matter which of the three possibilities, she couldn't be trusted. He knew he'd never take her word as gospel again. Military ships had been built with AIs that adhered strictly to the G protocols, which kept them from making decisions in a vacuum. A crew member asked for something and the AI made it happen. Before the trip to Pluto and Mira, Black had been capable of the occasional offhanded remark, but she was polite and helpful. Many times he'd had conversations with her while sitting in the cargo bay, asking questions, brushing up on new technologies or news from the inner planets. She never argued with him, never made him feel unintelligent for asking a question, and most of all, she minded her damn business. When he needed to vent, she would listen. Most importantly, anything he said to her was kept in confidence, unless it related directly to the safety of the crew or the completion of the mission. On a ship as small as an S&R, you could easily tire of your crewmates and need a sympathetic ear. She'd been that for him. That Black, however, was gone, whisked away by this new AI that had so many of her old traits but had transformed into something altogether different. Once they returned to Trident, he'd formally protest to the Colonel. His stomach fluttered, and he cast his eyes down at the deck. Assuming he's still alive, Oak said under his breath. Or anyone else.